Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Daniel. This is our part two of the Jesus is the Messiah and Not a Myth series that we're doing. And I really thought it would be appropriate if I just really go past some of the comments you made in our last debate and to really get our followers to understand what I think is going to be rational. So please hold off on a lot of the questions because there are points that you made in our last debate that I really want to address, and hopefully we can address in the time that we have allocated to us. So in our last debate, you said there are no outside sources that don't believe in the stories of the Bible. Therefore, there is no outside logical verification. Now, that is a fair argument that you made. However, there is third-party sources, and I'm hoping that we can establish, and I'm hoping that you can come to an agreement. That way, we can resolve this issue and move on to other issues. Now, Josephus Flavius was a Jewish scholar and historian. I could assume by stating that he was Jewish that this is someone who doesn't believe in the narrative of Jesus nor in the resurrection, being that he was the Messiah. And to correct a blunt statement I made in our last debate about him, he actually never disputed. He actually never, like, by his account of being Jewish, he obviously disputes the resurrection, even though he doesn't mention this in his writings. So what I really meant to say in our last debate was I meant to argue that he validates Saul of Tarsus and his character, which documents before his conversion and after his conversion. And the Gospels give an account what happened in between those two accounts, between the point in time when Saul was killing Christians to the point in time when he was preaching the gospel. The Bible actually talks about what happens. This is something Josephus Flavius does not give an account of, but he does talk about the change in Saul and Tarsus' heart. Now I just demonstrated in one outside source that is in complete agreement with the Saul of Tarsus account, that is in a complete agreement with the Bible, the before and after accounts of his resurrection. Now, I have 50 seconds left, so I just want to give you a chance to speak.
Okay. In the last debate, one of the things that I should have explained is, as an agnostic, what I'm saying is, when something is claimed, there must be an objective standard to prove that. And I think you would agree with that statement, and you have made an attempt to prove the validity of what you're saying. So the arguments that I was making were not necessarily saying everything about Christianity is wrong. It's completely wrong. Everything is false. Everything is inaccurate. That wasn't the point of that. The reason I was making those arguments is simply to show that there is a lot of logical doubt. Because ultimately the question is, has Christianity been shown to be conclusively true? Has it been shown beyond a reasonable degree of doubt? Once something is shown to a reasonable degree of certainty, then it is valid to put faith in the elements of it that are beyond comprehension. But I wasn't trying to say that it's all these arguments I was making, they disprove everything, they disprove it all. But what they do is they certainly cast doubt on the authenticity of the narrative itself. So any of the arguments that I'm making are not, I hate Christianity, I hate all of this. No, it's simply, I don't believe the narrative has proven itself to any degree of certainty. So let me actually respond to your points here and point out how they actually fall into the same problem. Now, you talked about how Josephus is an outside source and how he verifies Saul of Tarsus. Now, I have two responses to this. The first is that you even agreed he doesn't verify the resurrection. The whole point, the entire thing I was looking for was outside objective sources who can verify that the resurrection happened. Even within the Bible, there are 5 different narratives about what happened with the resurrection. Every single time the story comes up, it is told in a different light. That is not proving itself in any way. So I was looking for an objective outside source who could confirm that crucial story to the Christian narrative. Then you talked about how he validates Saul's character, which is your main point here. But my response to this is that's not proof. Of course, I mean, lots of people change in character, and it makes perfect sense that a historian would say, hey, this person used to be bad, and now they're much better. That's fine, but that's not proof of the validity of Christianity or any of the claims of the Bible. So what I was really looking for is a conclusive level of proof. So right now, I'm just looking at this in an objective standpoint. Like, I do not have a bias one way or the other. I don't believe necessarily that Christianity is correct or that it has necessarily been completely disproven. I don't believe either of those. So what I'm looking for is, as that objective viewer, how do you reach out to me and say, point A to point B, this is proven?
Okay, now I just want to make it clear. I never use those accounts to say that hey, this is the proof that Christianity is true. What I'm saying is, I really want to bring to account that you have to understand the narrative. You have to understand what was the state of mind of the apostles after the crucifixion, and what would happen later. And to bring it to Saul now, you would have to understand that this man was really like, he was a skeptic like how you are. He didn't believe in this Christianity stuff, and he hated it. And it's difficult. And you would notice that it's difficult to convince somebody of something to be true. And for you to have one instance where you have weeks prior, like a couple weeks prior, this man is killing Christians, don't want the message being preached at all, and then this man later now is a sympathizer with the Christians, going out suffering with them. You have to understand the narrative, what happened in between that point. That's all I'm saying. But it does give, like, what I mentioned Josephus because he talks about like a sudden change. Like this is a man killing. It's a different story when you're killing somebody and then all of a sudden you're now advocating for their cause. And there was a radical transformation that happened in between that he doesn't address, and that's the only reason I brought that up. Now I want to explain Josephus further, because his writings was Antiquities of the Jews, which was published in AD 1893. And in this, scholars actually generally agree that the following text accurately records Josephus' record of Jesus. I'll read an excerpt from Josephus' writing that validates the gospel accounts. Now, this is a Jewish man, not a Christian. He is a good objective source that you wanted. So his Antiquities of the Jews reads, now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, for he was a doer of wonderful works. The Bible talks about that. A teacher of such men as received the truth. Jesus was a teacher in the Bible. With pleasure, he drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. The Bible teaches this as well. When Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal man among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him first did not forsake him, and the tribe of Christians so named for him are not extinct to this day. This is completely aligned with what Scripture teaches. This is a summary, and he records it. Now, I want to go to a second account now, of the gospel accounts, a third-party source. And one of the things I love about Jesus is his identity is complex. He can't be pigeonholed. He doesn't fit one formula. There's a lot of aspects to who he is, which is why I addressed this point that there are different aspects and different ways people address him and describe the events that they saw in regards to the resurrection. Jesus himself is a challenge. He doesn't fit the status quo to preconditioned thinking about who the Son of God is, what Messiah must be, or his job and roles. And I'm just gonna allow you to talk.
Okay, I'm not really sure. I didn't get your final point there, but I'll let you get back to that in a moment here. But to the others that you had presented, you talked about how Saul goes from killing Christians to then preaching Christianity, that is an interesting point, and I see where you're going with that. But I do have two problems with that. The first is that it's not proof of the validity of the religion itself. I mean, sure, he's a nice person to have backup. It'd be like if you had a professor who was against one thing and then changes and believes in it. That's a good reason. But it's not proof of the authenticity of the religion itself. What I'd be looking for is much more definitive proof. Not just, oh, this points to it possibly being an answer, but something conclusively that says, here it is, this is correct, this has been proven. Not just that Christianity seems like a reasonable option, but that Christianity is conclusively proven to a reasonable degree of certainty. Jesus is the Messiah, that can be conclusively proven. And then the second response here is that Saul could have been wrong. I mean, unless you have some standard or some way of showing that, it makes sense that someone will change their opinions and that they can go make a radical transformation, but that doesn't mean that they're making a radical transformation for the right reasons. So that it still doesn't mean anything either way. You talk about how Josephus validates the Gospels. He talks about how Jesus exists, that he was a good teacher, and that he did good works, all of which I agree with. But I never contested any of that. I think Jesus did exist. My question is, what is it about Christianity that has been conclusively shown to be better than other religions? What is it about Christianity that is necessarily correct? And as someone who is looking for the proofs one way or the other, I would like to see maybe not 0 to 100%, but 95% certainty to a reasonable degree of certainty, Christianity has been proven. That's all I'm looking for there.
I'm going to get to that point towards the end, that Christianity has been proven. Those last two question points that you made, I will validate those points. But however, I want to continue to give you objective sources like you asked for. And I believe this isn't something I could just give you one source. I have to give you variations. And so we have another objective source, which is outside the Bible. And you have to understand that people who saw Jesus and walked with Jesus, and people who saw him, some were indifferent, some were neutral, and some actually, did actually believe that he was who he said he was. Now, the Talmud is another objective source, and it actually speaks of these things. It calls Jesus as a magician, and it's not flattering to call Jesus a musician or call anybody a musician in first century Judea. But the Talmud is a Jewish, it's a Jewish book, so they actually believe that he was a magician, and this is why they don't believe in him. And so the Talmud reads, "And a master has said, Jesus the Nazarene practiced magic." Now the Bible teaches that this was miracles. Now this is in correlation with the Bible, because at least they acknowledge that he was doing marvelous things. There's a historical recognition here, as I pointed out, that when Messiah, there is a Bible verse that actually talked about that when the Messiah would come. And it's actually a prophecy which was prophesied like centuries before Jesus came, and it talked about how you would recognize the Messiah, and one of it was the miracles. And so in Isaiah 35 verse 5-6, it said, "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as in heart, and the tongue of the dumb sing, for in the wilderness shall waters break out and streams in the desert." So this is a second account I give you that verifies the miracles Jesus was doing, that actually said, "Hey, I am the Messiah," and the wondrous works he was doing. So and a third source that I want to look for is that of Tacitus. Tacitus was a Roman scholar. And no, he was a Roman historian. Tacitus was a Roman historian, and he actually talks a lot about the spreading of the Christians in fear and the mass persecutions that happened to the earlier church, which the Bible talks about. And he gives a strong account of those. And in the book The Annals, I'm going to try to read it real fast. I have like 30 seconds. He said, "Called Christians by the populace, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty of the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate." The Bible validates him. "And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, yet broke out not only in Judea, but even in Rome." So he talks about the breakout from, you have Christians in a state mind of fear, running around scared of death, to now standing, proclaiming the gospel at point of martyr's end. And nobody would die for a lie.
Okay. So I'm not sure who your first source was, but I believe you said it was Jewish authors at the time who said that Jesus was a magician, which was negative, a negative portrayal of him. And well, my response would be, this seems like a relevant counterexample. When you're in a court of law, if you have the person who is accused of committing the crime, and you have another possible explanation, and the defense can say, look, this person might have done it too. So you can't say that my client has been proven to a reasonable degree of certainty. Well, that would be a reasonable defense. In the same light, when you are trying to prove Christianity, you have to show that there isn't a relevant counterinterpretation. Well, even your own argument right here just said there is a clear possible counterinterpretation, which was that Jesus was, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but the Jews, or many of them, seem to believe he was just a magician, even according to the arguments you're presenting there. And I would like to see how you can conclusively show that he was the savior and not just somebody who was a regular everyday magician. You talked about how there were prophecies that Jesus was fulfilling. Well, I have three responses to that. The first is that the Jews don't even accept that. I mean, these prophecies that supposedly are so conclusive, well, they didn't prove it at all to the majority of the people of that religion. They rejected the fact that those prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus, so that doesn't mean anything. The second response is that there are prophecies in multiple different religions. Just because a prophecy has been fulfilled doesn't mean that the religion itself is accurate. That just means, oh, okay, that's cool. One thing worked out the way they were hoping it would work out in the future. That's no proof one way or the other. And third, you're picking and choosing. There are a lot of prophecies that if they might have been mentioned and that you wouldn't zero in on because you don't really focus on them. But when the ones that do seem to support your narrative, those are the ones that you do zero in on. So it's not proof one way or the other. You're just looking for something that would back up what you were already believing in. What I'm talking about is starting with an objective standpoint, starting without already believing it and proving it, going from 0% proof to 100% proof, or at least a reasonable degree of proof. You talked about how Tacitus was a source who backed up what was being talked about. Well, two responses there. The first is that he never mentions the resurrection, and neither did any of the sources you presented there. Pivotal point in the whole narrative, and he hasn't mentioned, at least that you had read to me there. You talked about how there were martyrs, that he was talking about how Christians were being martyred, and he would prove that they were actually standing for that, and that people wouldn't be martyred for a lie. Maybe not, but they could be martyred for an incorrect statement. So that's not proof one way or the other.
Okay. Now I want to address an earlier point you challenged. You talked when I talked about Saul's conversion, you talked about that Saul could have been wrong, and you must understand that it was not like Paul. Like Paul didn't just come to believe in because he was a skeptic and he was anti-Christian. He didn't just come to believe just like this. He actually encountered the resurrected Christ, and it was not just him. It was 500 other people as well. So we have first-hand accounts from Apostle Paul, and we have 500 other people who he actually who he actually knows, who actually saw the resurrection with him. So later on now in Scripture, when he's writing to the Corinthian church, and he talks about the resurrection and how that exalted his belief, you have these 500 people who saw the resurrection there as well to actually the people in the Corinthian church can actually speak with them and to verify the things they have said. Now, you talked about different testimonies that people give variation of the resurrection. Well, you talked about court of law. In a court of law, if you have if I describe a crime in the same manner, 10 people that were there describe it in the same exact way, same exact sentence, the judge would say, hold up, there's a collusion. You guys orchestrated this, you guys had a conspiracy, and you like there's nothing authentic about the testimony you each are given. And so this is why you have the variations of the resurrection account. It is not to disprove it, it's just that everyone is unique, everyone is a unique individual, which also the Bible actually talks about, and everyone's going to give a unique account to the things that happen, and it's like in Scripture, there's a part of the Bible where you have one of the disciples, they talk about one blind man being like his eyesight being restored, and in another account you have two blind men. This is not to say that this is a contradiction of how many blind men there were. It's just that there was actually one of them who actually became more prominent and would later become a disciple. So he basically addresses him in one, like he addresses him like, hey, he healed one blind man. But in the other account, it was actually giving you the broad perspective of how many people he actually talked about. So it's important that that is clarified when we're actually like looking at accounts that we claim to either be contradictory or too many varying accounts to actually give it any validity. Now I believe that's enough of a valid point, and I'll give you a chance to speak.
How do you go from 0 to 100? Start with an objective standpoint and prove from without already believing what you're saying, just something you're talking, talk to me here. How do you go from not having a stance one way or the other to, wow, this is conclusively shown? Not, this seems like a logical possibility, but this is conclusively shown. How do you do that?
Okay, I gave you 3 accounts that show that they're conclusively shown, and I'm gonna look to give you 4 accounts. Now, you don't have to believe these accounts, but I'm giving you accounts. Okay, now I talked about Cornelius Tacitus. I talked about how he actually talks about how the dispersion of Christians from hiding to now standing boldly for the truth. He actually documents the historical account of this happening. Again, he doesn't address the resurrection, and I only present him as a case because I just want to show you that there are outside sources that verify what the Bible teaches about like post-resurrection. Now, Tacitus also wrote about I'm trying to remember what he wrote about. He actually talked about there was crap. I'm trying to remember crap. Give me a second. Okay, he actually Joseph of Arimathea. Now Joseph of Arimathea was he was from the council that actually condemned Jesus and actually sent Jesus, like condemned Jesus to death by crucifixion. And he records this historical account of like Jesus being sentenced to crucifixion. And he also talks about Joseph of Arimathea, and Joseph of Arimathea was a popular man. And he talks about how Joseph of Arimathea actually humbly just, from the council that actually condemned him, he actually gave up his grave site where Jesus would be buried. So he gave up his burial site, Joseph of Arimathea. And Tacitus talks about Joseph of Arimathea. Now, Joseph of Arimathea would be a legitimate, source because of the fact that he was like a senator. He was well known in the community. People knew where his grave site was. So in regards to location where Jesus was buried, there would be no dispute about that. And he gives an account of Joseph of Arimathea actually voluntarily going to the head leaders of the council and saying, hey, look, I want Jesus to be buried in this tomb. So now that actually skips to the point now to really where I really want to be at, which is the point of the resurrection. Now to the resurrection, the scriptures actually, and Tacitus even talks about empty tomb. Even though he doesn't address resurrection, he talks about an empty tomb. And in the Gospels actually talk about how there was a conspiracy, because if in that time period, if you let a prisoner go, you were sentenced to death. And so a lot of these guys who actually was surprised to see an empty tomb, they actually went to some of the disciples and they actually told the disciples that, hey, lie to the governor and tell the governor that they stole the body. And so the Bible actually teaches in verse 13 from chapter 28 of Matthew, it says, and when they were assembled with the elders and had taken away counsel, they gave them large money unto the soldiers, saying, say ye his disciples came by night and stole him away while he slept. So he verified.
So here's the thing. So far you've presented basically two people, both of whom are in the Bible, Joseph of Arimathea and Paul, both of whom were intelligent and were one of whom was a skeptic, and then they changed their position, which is nice. But you can see that with pretty much anywhere you go. None of that is proof that the religion itself is accurate, or that the idea that Jesus conclusively is the Messiah is accurate. See, I'm not even presenting any arguments here. In this one, I'm simply asking for the conclusive proof, not that it is possible. It is possible that Joseph of Arimathea and Paul were both right, that Jesus was the Messiah. I'm not even going to contest that in this debate. I'm just saying it's not proven to any degree of certainty, and you could see that with pretty much any religion. Muhammad says that there are so many of these sorts of stories that prove him. You see that in the Book of Mormon. There's so many people who were skeptics and then changed, but that isn't proof that the religion itself is accurate. I'm looking for something that would prove to a reasonable degree of certainty that Jesus is the Messiah, and that there is more reason to believe that he is the Messiah than there is to believe in any other religion or put faith specifically in this one. You talked about the empty tomb. The empty tomb is an interesting one because, first of all, why would they have a stone rolled away to show an empty tomb? And I think I mentioned this at the end of the last debate. But if there is a God, if there is an infinite being, he can go through walls. That's obvious. He doesn't need to roll away a stone. You know who rolls away stones? People who are breaking in. That's just how that is. There's no reason, and even if it wasn't, there's no reason to believe to a reasonable degree of certainty that your interpretation of that story is necessarily correct. It is entirely possible that the Jews stole the body. And there's no reason to believe otherwise. In fact, it's probably more likely that the Jews stole the body, because even the Bible itself says that those were the stories that were being spread. You mentioned it was in Matthew 28 that was being said. Well, why don't we just believe that's the narrative? We weren't there. That seems like a completely reasonable explanation. Let's go back to the court of law. Two possible counter interpretations that could have happened. So your interpretation is not shown to a reasonable degree of certainty at all.
I disagree. I disagree. I think it is shown a great degree of uncertainty, and it's amazing how you mentioned it's my personal interpretation when I actually quoted an objective source, something that you wanted, Daniel. You wanted objective source, and I gave you Tacitus. All right, so you can't say this is personal interpretation. I gave you Tacitus account. This is not a believer. This is this is a Roman historian. All right, the presence of Joseph empty tomb is actually good proof to validate Christianity because it indicates a historically reliable it presents a historical reliably information that is objectified by a third party source. His name is known, and like I said, his name was known, like how Sender would be today, and it was clear that his tomb, like where his tomb was, people already knew where his tomb was, and so there's no question about location of the burial. Also, the burial could not be made up. The empty tomb narrative, the reason why I mentioned it, has an embarrassing future because, namely, the discovery of the empty tomb was by women. Now you have to understand the status of women in first century Judea it was a patriarchal society, and so women were second-class citizens. If you were going to invent an account of an empty tomb, why would you invent primary witnesses of whom nobody would believe, hence women? You wouldn't choose a woman with a shady past to be a primary witness, therefore being Mary Magdalene, who was lowly regarded with women, and she's at the forefront expressing what she had witnessed, and with regards to the empty tomb. Now, you talked about being rolled away, like a divine being could, if he was a divine being, he could easily roll away the tomb. But the gospel doesn't talk about he rolled away the tomb. He talks about the of live bodily resurrection, and this, and really the growth of the earlier church and the disciples taking a stand is really strong proof, like as verified by third party sources, like I mentioned Josephus Flavius, like Cornelius Tacitus, is strong proof that these people actually encountered something, because you even have James. James was the half brother of Jesus. He was a skeptic like how you are. He didn't believe anything until he actually saw it, and he didn't really come to faith and really thought that this gospel is worth being preached and worth going out there, because they thought Jesus was a psychic, like a complete idiot, like idiotic person who was out of his mind, because his teachings, they didn't believe in it. And so it wasn't until after the resurrection account, which third party sources verify and actually talk about, that you now have James, you have guys like Apostle Paul going out there. Like, I'm not saying martyrs and validates anything of the gospel, because yes, that could be said about any other faith, but you have to understand the state of mind these people were in, and not willing to die for this, and now they're willing to go out and speak and go against the authorities.
All right, so you mentioned that you'd shown Tacitus, who is an objective source, and he had pointed out that there was an empty tomb. Okay, so there was an empty tomb, but that doesn't prove that Jesus himself rose from the dead. That just proves that he wasn't in his tomb. He could have been grave robbed. That's not proof at all. You're talking about an objective source as if he said something he didn't actually say. Actually, I'll just lead to that. Leads to my second response, which is no one saw the resurrection. Nobody. They saw the tomb afterwards. That's not proof in any way, shape, or form. I do agree with your point about the status of women, that women were considered lower class citizens. And so you wouldn't want to make up a story that depended on the words of women. I understand that. And that is a nice point in favor of the narrative itself. But that isn't proof that the narrative is accurate. That's just a good response to the idea that you shouldn't disbelieve women. Yeah, sure. But it doesn't prove the narrative itself is correct. What I'd be interested in would be proof from you or from someone that the Jews did not steal the body. Because it seems like a perfectly reasonable interpretation to believe that they did. Even the Bible itself says that was the narrative that was being shared. And the Jews at the time, many of them continued to believe that that was the story. I believe you even pointed out that Josephus seemed to believe that was the narrative. Lots of people were believing that narrative. Court of law here. You have two completely possible interpretations of what happened. How do you disprove the other one? You talked about how there was other sources who had seen the live bodily resurrection, which was inaccurate. None of your sources actually said they saw a live bodily resurrection. You said that the Bible said there was a live bodily resurrection. It says that, but nobody saw that. There's no one who saw that actually happen. In fact, if you read the accounts of each of the things that are seen, Each of the people have different stories of who was there. There are 5 different stories for the 4 Gospels, and I believe Acts of the Apostles, and every single one of them has a different number of people who showed up to the tomb. But even out of those stories, none of them say that they saw Jesus resurrecting. They just saw a stone rolled away and burial cloths. They didn't actually see the resurrection. Nobody did. So it is perfectly a reasonable interpretation to believe that the body was stolen. You got to show me conclusive proof. If you want to say this is conclusive on your side, you got to show conclusive proof that your interpretation is accurate. And you mentioned Josephus. Well, Josephus didn't see the resurrection. He never mentioned that. He didn't believe it happened. He said the opposite. And lastly, you said that people were skeptics, but that a lot of people were seeing Jesus as crazy. You even mentioned some were seeing him as a magician. Well, that's exactly the point. Some people believed him, but a lot of people didn't. That's not proof.
Okay. Again, for the last time, this is not my personal interpretation. I gave you accounts. I gave you Tacitus. I gave you Josephus Flavius. I'm giving you third-party accounts that don't believe. I'm not saying they saw the resurrection. I'm giving you accounts to what they document happening prior to the resurrection, after the resurrection, and post-resurrection. I'm talking years later in regards to the state of fear people were in, and who actually believed in Jesus, the state of skepticism that some people were in before they actually saw the risen Jesus. And so he talks about the after effects of something he never addressed, but he just talks about the after effect. And I believe that is strong circumstantial evidence to actually validate the Gospels. Now, I know for a fact you would not be willing to go to the most oppressive parts of the world today and talk about something that you have not actually verified to be true. And if you were in a state of mind of fear of actually believing this thing was true, at the point of death, any human being would at any moment recant their statements. All of us have that conscience. We all have a will to live. And these apostles came from the point of having a will to live to no longer having that point to live, not willing to testify, not willing. You have Peter, and look, you claim to have read the Bible. Peter was a denier. Peter gave 3 accounts that he actually denied Jesus 3 times. And you have this man now who is like, he's like, yo, dude, I'm not denying Jesus no more. I have every reason to believe and preach this even to the death of me. And I'm not going to recant my statement. Even Romans knew how to kill people. People were scared of the Romans. So for anyone to just be willing to come at the Romans, I mean, you would have to have something really, really circumstantial that happened that you have saw to really, really want to stand both for this. Now, I really want to flip the table because I believe I'm giving the accounts, but I don't believe it's really going anywhere. I think you're just keeping it there. I really want to move this to interesting territory. So now I want to flip the table a bit. Somehow you have to explain to me the explosion of scared followers who run away to being bold followers. Can you give a account of this? Can you give a explanation to what can be a potential explanation to explaining this point?
The point about people who are not believers and then they become believers and then they're willing to be martyred for it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that as well. And also those who are afraid and hiding and now boldly coming out, not being afraid, disobeying authority, not to preach in the name of Jesus. You have to give an account of can you explain can you explain what just explain the explosion of from being scared or to being a skeptic to now being bold and standing for the gospel.
Sure. People sometimes do amazing things. And sorry, I mean, it's as simple as that. And sometimes if you decide to really, really believe in something, you will become very, very passionate about it. Like you yourself are. We see this with a lot of people. And oftentimes it can lead you to do incredible things. So I'm sorry, man. I'm not trying to be like avoiding your question and everything, but that's not proof. You're acting like that's proof, but it's not. There are people who will rise to incredible feats because they care about something, and it's great that these early Christians cared so much about their faith. But you see that all over the place with all sorts of different religions. You see that with the Romans. There are stories of Romans who were believing in their gods, who would have their hands cut off, or they would be tortured, and they would still believe in the Roman gods. It was just, that's how people sometimes are when they deeply care about something like that. That's not proof of the religion itself. You had talked about how you had objective sources, and yeah, I know you presented objective sources, but none of those are objective sources who prove the story you are trying to say. They say that Jesus existed. Yeah, I know. I agree with that. They say that the tomb was empty. I know. I agree with that. But what would need to be proven in order to prove the verifiability, if that's the right word, but to verify the status of your claims, would be to show to a reasonable degree of certainty that Jesus himself rose from the dead, and that there was someone who saw that, or some way of showing that, without the counter interpretation, which is that his body was stolen. Even in the Bible, it says that there were people who were saying the body was stolen. Josephus, your source, who you're saying believes what you're saying, he doesn't. He thought the body was stolen. I see no reason to disbelieve either. And I mean, it's possible that your interpretation is accurate. It's possible that Jesus rose from the dead. I'm not saying it's not, but it's not proven to any degree of certainty.
Okay, can you give me an account from Josephus' writings, Antiquities of the Jews, where he actually talks about the body being stolen? I'm interested. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to ask you to do it now because it's going to be too much time wasted. But I would like you to really put that in the comment section for all our viewers to see. I would like to see the documented account of that, because I gave you documented accounts. I would like to see a documented account of that. Now, to my question, you said, well, people could just do miraculous things. I mean, I don't understand. I really don't understand that point. So you're trying to say that people can do miraculous things in regards to just start believing, and at one point they didn't believe? I mean, I really don't get it. It's really not making any logically sense. It's like I'm asking you a question of like, explain to me how you can have, for example, North Korea Kim Jong-un being this person who wants to blow up the United States, to now being this person who wants to make peace with the United States. What could have happened in between? And I'm giving you accounts of what would happen, where, you know, there were elected officials who actually met with him, spoke with him, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm asking you, and now I give you these accounts, but yet you reject these accounts. And now I actually give a better explanation to explain what could have radically changed Kim Jong-un's way of thinking from wanting to blow up the United States to no longer wanting to blow the United States. And now your comment is, well, he could just do marvelous things. He could just do miraculous things. I mean, that completely makes no sense. That completely communicates that doesn't communicate anything. It doesn't address my question. It just, in essence, just says, hey, people could just change their heart at an instant. I mean, I give you one instance of a person that cannot just change in an instant. Something has to be circumstantially has to occur for that person to just change. It can't just happen. Hey, okay, I want to blow up the United States today. No, okay, tomorrow I don't want to blow him up. Or weeks earlier, I want to blow up the United States, and like 3 weeks later, I don't want to blow up the United States. I want to know, can you give me a real explanation? Give me a real explanation. I want, like, if you really want to really establish your argument, I really feel you have to give a rational explanation of what could have happened for you to have skeptics not believing, skeptics who are not willing to go out to ends to preach this gospel, leave their families and like go days on end without eating just so that they can preach this gospel, and individuals who were anti-Christian to now going out and preaching this. You have to give an explanation. Don't just give me the bailout. I'm not gonna let you bail out on that. I'm not gonna let you off easy. You give me an explanation. Don't give me this, oh, that people just do marvelous things. If you say, hey, they saw marvelous things, now you're talking. But if you can't just say, oh, they did marvelous things, give me a break. I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, so I'm not presenting any arguments against Christianity here. I haven't. I did in the last debate, but I'm not here. I'm just looking for the conclusive proof, and I don't see it. And see, the problem that we have here is you believe this narrative from your side. I don't believe it from either side. And I'm looking for something that would prove it to either an objective viewer, such as myself, or someone who disagrees with it, like an atheist. The only reason you would believe these skeptics is that the way they changed and everything is because you already agree with what they changed to. There are skeptics who adopt any sort of religion, but that doesn't make all the other religions accurate. In the last debate, I had said that there were 30,000 different religions. That was inaccurate because there are actually 4,200 different religions or belief systems, and there are 30,000 denominations under those larger groups. Like Christianity has 30,000 of its own in individual denominations. But the point is, there are stories in every single one of those religions of people who were martyred because they were so believing in what they had in their faith. That doesn't prove that the other 4,200 religions are accurate. It doesn't. It just says, oh, those people believed it was accurate, which is very different. You asked about miraculous things. Yeah, you know what? That's impressive. And I was talking with Yaz about this the other day, actually. I don't disagree that there's probably a spiritual realm. I think there probably is. I think that there are aspects that every religion taps into of that spiritual realm. But what I was looking for is the conclusive nature that this specific one is better than the other ones. And I definitely don't see that. I know that I'm kind of frustrating you here. I'm not trying to be like that or anything. It's simply that all of these things you're saying don't prove it to an objective viewer. They point to it as a possibility. And so that's where we're going to run into a wall here, because you think that it is necessarily proven and you were determined to believe it. And to me, that doesn't get all the way there. It says it's possible, but it doesn't say it's accurate. Let me actually go to the Josephus thing again. Like, for instance, Josephus, you wanted me to post something from Josephus. I was actually just going off of what you said. You said that Josephus said that Jesus had existed and that there was an empty tomb. Or no, Tacitus was an empty tomb. I'm not sure exactly, but that neither of them said that anyone had seen Jesus rising from the dead. Nothing about that is proven. It is just as valid to believe the other narrative of the time, which was that the body was stolen.
I gave you circumstantial documentation of these historians. That's what I did. So I felt the circumstantial evidence would have been conclusive enough for you. Obviously, it did not. And by the way, I'm not frustrated. I'm actually having a good time talking to you. Honestly, I'm just being very serious because I really want to get down to the bottom of this, because I believe there's something beyond just intellectual that's really hindering your ability to accept any of the conclusive documentation I gave you. And I look to go into that later in this debate, not now. But I gave you conclusive documentation. I gave you I gave you conclusive historians. I gave you individuals who were outside. I gave you third-party sources. This is what you wanted in our last debate, if I'm not mistaken. Now, you mentioned how you're not bringing up arguments, but you're clearly bringing arguments when you say, hey, look, this can be said about other accounts, other religions. Okay, I challenge you on this point because you bring it up, and I believe if you bring anything up, it's a valid point for me to challenge you on it. I mean, you say you're not presenting arguments, but it's clearly an argument, dude. I mean, give me a break. You said that you would have to prove without a reasonable doubt, like all the other faiths are somehow untrue, and what makes Christianity unique to the other testimonies that of other faiths that claim resurrection. All right, give me a faith that claims a resurrection, and give me objective sources. Give me three solid. Matter of fact, just give me one. Give me one solid objective source that validates any of the claims of any of these faiths that you're talking about. You also talk about Roman gods, but however, I just want you to focus whichever way you want to take this. Whether you want to talk about a Roman god and give third-party sources for it, or any of the Jewish faiths and you want to give third-party sources for it that equate to talking about atonement, forgiveness of sins, and miracles of someone who claims to be the savior of the world. I'll pass it back to you.
I understand why you would ask those questions. I do. But I don't think you understand my perspective on this, which is that I don't believe any of them either. I'm not anti-Christian. I just don't think that any religion has been proven to any reasonable degree of certainty. All of them, to a certain level, disprove each other. And yet at the same time, I actually think this is probably true. I think that all of them have an aspect of the truth inside of them. There certainly is a spiritual realm. There are people who do things that are beyond our human understanding. There are people who will, through superhuman strength, be willing to die for their faith. But that doesn't prove the specific faith itself. For instance, I mean, I know you're not a Muslim, but you see all over the place, you see this incredible willingness to die for what they believe in. And they think that it's important. They think that it's going to take them to paradise. And I think they're wrong. I'm almost certain they're wrong. And I think you would think so too. But you're using the same arguments as if that proves Christianity. But you don't believe it when they do it in Islam. So I'm not as much bringing up a new argument here, because in the last debate, I presented a lot of contradictions that I saw within Christianity. I'm not trying to do that here, because I understand that it's very personal to people, and it kind of struck people the wrong way. I don't want to be like that. But I'm simply saying I don't see any reason to set one religion apart from another. And especially since you can use the same arguments about any of them. So when you ask me for an objective standpoint to prove one of those other religions, I don't actually want to. I don't want to prove any of them. I don't believe in any of them. I believe them as much as I believe Christianity. Actually, you know what? I think Christianity makes a little more sense than a lot of them. But it's not proven to any reasonable degree of certainty. There are aspects of it that make sense. Actually, let's use this. Thomas Jefferson had his Jeffersonian Bible, which I think is a really good idea, and he takes out a lot of the things that are questionable, the historical, and he more focuses on just the teachings of Jesus. And I think that that's a really good idea, because there are some great teachings the man had, and I believe a lot of them. And I also believe that a lot of other religions tap into that same sort of thing. I think even naturalism taps into that same element, that there are things about this universe that are beyond our comprehension. All I'm saying is that to say that Christianity has necessarily gotten it all right doesn't seem to have been proven in any way.
Okay. You talked about that you believe that different faiths do present some truths. As you're an agnostic, I understand that. Okay, what is your standard for measuring truth? I really want you to clarify on this statement. What is your standard for measuring truth?
Yeah, that's a good question. At least for me, I think it would be something that can be reasonably shown. I think that you can show certain things through logic. Like through mathematics, you can say that 2 and 2 are 4. You can say that 2 times 10 is 20, and that 20 divided by 10 would be 2. You can reverse check things, and that's what I was talking about in our last debate. In the same way, if someone wanted to claim that a faith has been shown to a reasonable degree of certainty, they should be able to show how the claims are conclusive one way, and then when we reverse check them, we come back to the same thing. So when we're talking about truths, I'm talking about things that we can show with our finite minds, and we do have finite minds, so we can't necessarily know them conclusively, but we can get as close to mathematical certainty as possible. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Yes, it does answer, and I believe I did those things. I provided conclusive circumstantial evidence. I provided third-party conclusive sources. I believe I did that. Now you talked about Islam, and you talked about their martyrdom, but to really make a comment like that, you have to understand how Islam grew historically. Unlike Christianity, Islam grew by the sword. It grew by military engagement. And you have many individuals who converted to Islam and died for its cause out of fear of dying. And so it was out of, just like I said, we all have a will to live. It was out of the fear of dying that many have joined the faith and have been willing to die for its cause. Because if you were to leave the battleground in war, the consequences of leaving in the battlefield can be brutal for you. Like literally, you would die by those you were fighting with. And so that is the real distinction between you have the martyrs in Islam and the martyrs here. A lot of Islam tenets are by compulsion. In Christianity, there's no compulsion. It's present the gospel, and it's in constantly with showing you love and being patient with you, that we hope to be able to win you over to believing in the gospel. And it's also a logical faith. But in Islam, it isn't about that. It's more about fear, compulsion, and Hence why you have many individuals who in Islamic countries, they kill Christians and they kill people who refuse to testify to the faith. So it's out of fear they get many converts, and many of these converts to later on now go kill for the cause of Islam, because there is fear that if one does not do what they were taught by their particular imam, that they would die, and we all have a will to live, and so you're going to try to do whatever it is to be, not die under the hand of an authority. And now to another point. Okay, so I believe I did those things. Now Islam does not provide a conclusive proof in the essence where you have in the hadith, it talks about Adam and Eve being 90 feet tall. And like, you can look back now and look today, and you can look and look, wait a minute, no, there's no human beings that's 90 feet tall. And medical experts have even talked about how no human being can be that tall, because their intestines would, like, it's just impossible. Now you also talked about mathematics. There was a college professor of math and science named Dr. Peter Schoner, and he wanted to determine what the odds were that any human being throughout history can fulfill the messianic prophecies. So he had his students come up with conservative estimates of likelihood of any human being fulfilling certain of these predictions, and what they determined is the odds of any human being fulfilling any of these 48 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, when they ran the numbers, were 1 in 13 trillion chance. So there is a mathematical impossibility that any other individuals could have fulfilled 48 different prophecies that were foretold prior to the birth of Jesus Christ, talking about how he would come, etc.
That's cool. That actually is cool. And I've heard a similar story in Islam where they believe that I can't remember if it was the prophecies, or there was some narrative, and they were trying to prove Islam, and they said that it was like a 1 in 500,000 something chance for the prophecies in Islam, and that they had been proven. But obviously we don't accept that, neither you or I. I think that there is a certain level that people are cherry picking information. They want so hard to believe their specific faith that they only focus on the elements of it that would do so, without actually looking at it in perspective. And I think that that's where we're going to run into a bit of a problem. We actually have kind of run into kind of a wall on that. In that, I would say the difference is proof versus possibility. A lot of the things that you are saying are proof aren't actually proof. They're possibilities. And if they were said about any other religion, you wouldn't actually believe they are proof. But because you already believe in Christianity, you believe it means it's proven. And then to me, that doesn't prove it to me, because I'm looking at it from a perspective outside of Christianity. And that's ultimately where neither of us are going to be able to have the same answers. That's why we kind of wind up talking past each other on those sorts of issues. But let me just talk about the objective sources who you presented. There is something missing from all of them. None of them, whether in the Bible or anywhere else, actually saw Jesus resurrect. Nobody did. There's no objective source who saw that. The only objective sources who are there say there was an empty tomb. That's very different than proof. There are also equivalent stories in the Bible, as well as in historical texts and in the tradition of the time from the Jews, that said that the body had been stolen. There's just as much reason to put faith in that interpretation as there is in the interpretation that Jesus rose from the dead. And that ultimately is where we come back to that ultimate issue there, which is you want to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And you might be right. I'm not saying you're wrong. It's possible. But it's not proof when there's just as much reason to believe the alternative explanation. And I think that's all that I really have there. I'll have one more speech after this and everything. But ultimately, it just comes down to that. And I understand why you believe what you believe. And I think that you have good reasons for it. But none of them are objective proof as much as they are simply possibility.
Okay, can you explain to me where could the body have gone? If it was stolen, why couldn't the Roman authorities just completely show it to the Christians who were proclaiming Jesus was the Messiah? Because they wanted them to shut up. Why couldn't they just pull out the body? Can you explain that?
Sure. Maybe they hid it somewhere. I don't know. I don't have an answer on a lot of these things. I'm simply looking at the evidence and saying what has been shown one way or the other. And it seems clear that if there's a possible alternate explanation, then it hasn't been shown. Maybe the Jews took the body out of the tomb and buried it. Maybe they took it out and hid it in one of their houses. Maybe the Romans took it out. I don't know. I wasn't there, neither were you. But all we do know is the evidence of the time, and of that evidence, all that is there is simply that the stone was rolled away, which again does not lend credibility to the idea that God rose from the dead, because he wouldn't have needed to have done that if it was actually God. That lends more credibility to the alternate story. So I see no reason to put faith in one over the other.
Okay, what about you talked about the Jews giving an account of, that's contradiction to resurrection. What makes their point valid?
I told you, this is the thing about agnosticism, is I don't have I don't put faith in their story. I don't know what the answer is. And this is something I think I told Nelson. There are a lot of arguments for Christianity that will say, we don't know how God could have existed. There must have been an unmoved mover, Aquinas' arguments. And the idea of that is, we don't have an explanation for how this could have happened. Therefore, there must be a creator. But that's a wrong syllogism. The correct way of phrasing that syllogism would be, we don't know how this could have happened. Therefore, we don't know how this could have happened. Not, we don't know, therefore God. That's an inaccurate syllogism. And it's the same thing with the story of the resurrection. It's not, we don't know, therefore resurrection. It's, we don't know, therefore we don't know. We don't have an answer. It's possible that the interpretation that God rose from the dead is the correct one, or it's possible that there's an alternative explanation. But there's no proof of it one way or the other. So it's wrong to say with any degree of certainty that it has been shown.
I gave the circumstantial evidence that validates it. I mean, these individuals prior to the resurrection, they were not willing to go out to challenge the Roman authorities. And the Roman authorities, you have to understand, they had enough authority to go to every house. There was no Fourth Amendment rights for nobody. Like, you can't invade their homes. They could have went to every home in the Roman culture and looked for the body if it was buried. Okay, so automatically that point is already completely fabricated. And really, it's like this. I'm trying to give an example. It's like you're trying to get your, like, let's say you have a brother. Let's say you're trying to get your brother to be quiet about seeing a fire burning. If you want your brother to be quiet, you would have to actually show that, hey, look, there is no fire burning in the house, and in order to get him to be quiet. And it's the same way the Romans could have easily, once those Christians started preaching resurrection, they could have easily just pull out the body, found the body in the Roman culture, and just say, hey, look, there is no resurrection. These people are lunatics. I mean, but there's no account of that.
Okay. I see. This is what I was saying. I think that we're going to wind up talking past each other here, because you're acting like I have to prove a certain narrative, and I'm just saying I don't know what the answer is, and you don't either. But you choose by faith to believe one of them, and that interpretation might be correct. I don't know. It's possible. But it's not proven. And that's ultimately why I'm an agnostic, because it hasn't been proven to any reasonable degree of certainty one way or the other. Trying to pass the mic.
Daniel, your pursuit of understanding Christianity, I don't believe it is an intellectual journey. I believe the reason why you don't want there to be a God, or want to believe in the evidences I gave you, is because you don't want to be held accountable for your life. It's a conviction that we all have. We don't want to be accountable to nobody for our life. Am I right?
No. I started as a Christian, and I read Jesus' words when he said, I am the way, the truth, and the light. And I said, wow, okay, if Jesus is the truth, the most truthful thing I can do is challenge him. And ultimately, I will come to the conclusion through the arguments, through the evidence, that he is the truth, because that's what he said. But then when I looked at all the arguments, there was no way to conclusively prove his existence. And there were a whole lot of arguments against him. And that's ultimately why I became where I am now. So I'm just going to finish up here and simply say I understand your convictions. I believe they are valid. I believe they are possible. But in the pursuit of logic, it seems clear that it has not been conclusively proven one way or the other.
All right. Okay, Daniel. So, Daniel, I encourage you, man. I encourage you to really begin to investigate this again with an open mind and take it as your baby, and you're rediscovering Christianity all over again. And I challenge you to make 3 resolutions that you're going to make a front burner your issue from this day forth. You're going to have an open mind, even if the conclusions are not to your liking, and that you resolve that once the evidence, like once you got all the evidence, you will reach a verdict for the case of if Jesus was the Messiah or was the historical narrative of the resurrection completely a myth. Good night.